This wasn't supposed to happen.
If you win this, I'll marry you. The cold Mafia boss who couldn't accept losing believed a woman would never be able to beat him, but she did, and now he has to honor the bet. The problem? She was already in an arranged marriage, and her father is the most powerful billionaire in the country, willing to do anything to tear them apart.
Welcome to my library. I'm Lena, and our story is just beginning.
Chapter 1. The Bet.
You underestimated me.
I definitely shouldn't have been in that place. The Volkov Club occupied the basement of an apparently abandoned building in the Lower East Side, but anyone with half a functioning brain knew that place pulsed with more money and danger than most banks in Manhattan. Criminal elite, extremely high-stakes poker, the kind of place where fortunes changed hands between one puff of a Cuban cigar and the next, and where people disappeared for asking the wrong questions. "Are you sure about this?" Lily whispered beside me, eyes wide as we descended the black marble staircase. Like, absolutely sure? Because we could still go to that cute bar and— Lily, I didn't take my eyes off the room opening before me. Breathe. Easy for you to say. You don't have an ounce of survival instinct. I smiled, adjusting the bangs falling over my eyes. I'd chosen the black dress purposefully, elegant enough not to stand out, but simple enough not to scream, rebellious billionaire heiress. The angelic appearance helped. Nobody expected a girl with a porcelain doll face to know how to calculate odds or read micro-expressions. Their mistake. The room was exactly as I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than luxury cars. Poker tables strategically arranged. Men in suits, always men, with expensive drinks, and even more expensive expressions. The air smelled of aged whiskey, cigar smoke, and money. Lots of money. Amateurs, I murmured, observing the tables. Lily nearly choked. "You can't say that here. These amateurs kill people, Scar, but they play poker like children." And it was true. I could see from where I stood. Obvious tells, emotional betting, transparent bluffs. 3 minutes of watching, and I already knew who would win each hand before the cards turned. MIT hadn't just been about math. It had been about reading patterns, and people were the easiest patterns of all. 3 hours earlier, an intense argument had happened. "You're going to marry Edmund's son." My father's voice didn't allow for discussion. Never did. I looked at him across the absurdly long dinner table. Crystals, silverware, food nobody touched, because dinners at the Ashford family were never about food. They were about control. "I won't," I said, with the same calm I'd used to decline more wine. "It's not a suggestion, and it's not negotiable." I placed my fork delicately on the plate. "I'm not going to marry a man who thinks my only purpose is to decorate his living room." Scarlet. My father took a deep breath, that air of fake patience he always used before exploding. "You're 27 years old. It's past time to stop with these childish rebellions and accept your place in this family." "My place?" I tilted my head, the sweet smile not matching the venom in my voice. "You mean the place you reserved for me? Trophy wife to some idiot who'll continue the Ashford legacy while I smile for cameras? Women don't run empires." There it was, the phrase I'd heard my whole life, Richard Ashford's sacred mantra. I stood up, still wearing that smile that made people underestimate the fury burning inside. "Then you better prepare to be surprised." I left before he could respond, before he could see the tears of rage I would never shed in front of him. Lily answered on the second ring. "Get me out of here," I said. "Anywhere. Now." And Lily, being the best friend in the universe, knew exactly where to go. "But let's return our focus to the club." "That's the main table," Lily whispered, pointing discreetly. I followed her gaze and saw him, Nikolai Volkov. I'd seen photos. Everyone in New York who read newspapers or frequented circles where whispers were worth more than headlines knew the name. Russian mafia boss, casino owner, dangerous in every possible way. But photos didn't do him justice. He sat with the posture of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, because everyone already knew. Impeccable black suit, dark hair slicked back, a jawline that looked sculpted by someone with serious anger issues against marble, and eyes, God, those eyes, steel gray, cold, the kind that made you wonder how many people they'd been the last thing to see. He turned a card, won the hand. Obviously, I watched. 1 hand, 2, 3, and then I saw it, the pattern, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He touched the ring on his pinky finger, just a light brush. Whenever he was bluffing, always. "You have a tell," I said, loud enough for him to hear. The effect was immediate. The entire room seemed to suck the air back in. Conversations died. Men turned to look at me as if I'd just announced I had a bomb. Maybe I did. A bomb called Scarlet Ashford and Zero Filters. Nikolai lifted his eyes, slowly, like a predator that heard movement in the darkness. "Excuse me." The voice was deep, soft but present Russian accent, dangerous in a way that made my spine tingle. Attell. I took 3 steps toward the table, aware of all eyes on me. You touch the ring when you're bluffing. Absolute silence. Nikolai looked at his own hand, at the silver ring on his pinky, and then smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a shark that just found something interesting swimming too close. And you are? Someone who plays better than you. Laughter exploded around the table. Someone spit out their drink. The man beside Nikolai, Victor, I'd discover later, coughed to hide what was definitely a laugh. Nikolai stood up. God. He was tall, 6'3", easy, a presence that filled the space. He walked until he was inches from me, looking down, intimidating. But I'd grown up in a family where intimidation was served at breakfast. I didn't blink. Confident, he tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle. Let me guess. Daddy taught you to play at the country club? The condescension in his voice could cut glass. I smiled. Sweet, innocent, the deadliest weapon in my arsenal. Actually, I taught myself. Daddy thinks women don't have brains for numbers. And do they? Sit down and find out. Something flashed in his eyes. Interest, amusement, something more dangerous. Sit, he said, gesturing to the empty chair. Victor coughed. Boss, are you sure that? I said, sit. I sat, adjusted my dress, looked at the cards being dealt, and smiled. The game, the first hand, was almost insultingly easy. I calculated the probabilities before the cards finished falling, watched the other players, 3 besides Nikolai, and read every micro-expression. Bet conservatively. 1. Luck, Nikolai said, voice flat. I gathered the chips. Second hand, a bit more complex. Calculated bluff. Saw when the man to my right sweated slightly, when another touched his collar. When Nikolai touched the ring, bluff. I bet high. 1. Lucky again, Nikolai said, but the tension in his jaw said otherwise. Third hand. I won before even turning the last card. That's not luck, darling. I stacked the chips with delicate fingers. It's math. MIT, if you want to know. The room was absolutely frozen. People had moved closer. Whispers ran like electricity. She's winning. From Volkov. Nobody beats Volkov. Nikolai leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced, studying me in a way that made me feel like he was seeing far beyond what I wanted to show. You're good, he finally said. Thank you. I tilted my head. Genuine for a second. You too. Just predictable. His lips curved. Predictable. A low laugh. Nobody's called me that before. First time for everything. We played for 2 hours. The audience grew. Side bets started. Chips changed hands, and I maintained the advantage. Nikolai didn't seem furious. He seemed fascinated, like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve, and that intrigued him more than it irritated. Where did you learn to read people like that? He asked after losing another hand. I paused. Real vulnerability crossed my face for a second before I controlled it. When you grow up in a family that underestimates you, you learn to observe. I shuffled the cards with skilled fingers. And to win. Your family is stupid. The sincerity in his tone caught me off guard. No condescension, no fake pity, just fact. Thank you. You're welcome. A moment. Strange connection. 2 strangers who understood the weight of families that didn't deserve them. Then Nikolai picked up the cards, and the game continued. The fatal bet. Last hand. Me leading by a considerable margin. Nikolai leaned back in his chair, that arrogant smile back. You know what? You're good, but you'll never beat me. I'm literally beating you right now. Luck. He gestured to his chips. Let's make this interesting. Isn't it already? All in. He pushed all his chips to the center. Everything I have on the table. The room exploded in murmurs. I raised an eyebrow. And? Nikolai leaned forward, eyes fixed on me, predatory smile on his lips. And if you win this game, dramatic pause. Everyone held their breath. I'll marry you. My world stopped. Victor choked on his own drink. Boss, I'm sorry, what? I blinked. Nikolai was laughing, clearly mocking. Marriage, you and me, papers signed. Pause. But you won't win, so don't worry, princessa. Princessa? Russian? Princess? The smile was pure poison. Because you're clearly spoiled. I felt my blood boil, but kept my face calm, always calm when it mattered. And if I win, I tilted my head. You really get married? If you win, yes. Word of honor. He sounded absolutely confident. But it won't happen. And if you win, then you owe me a favor. Any favor I choose. I studied him. That arrogance, that absolute certainty. Men like him never expected to lose, especially not to women. Fatal mistake. I extended my hand. Deal. When our fingers touched, electricity passed between us. Something more than game tension. Something dangerous. The cards were dealt. The final hand, absolute tension. You could cut the air with a knife. Nikolai looked at his cards. That confident smile. Almost bored. Like he already knew he'd won. I kept a neutral expression. Calculated. Observed. Bets were made. Cards revealed. River card turned. Total silence. Full house. I said softly, turning my cards. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Nikolai looked. His expression changed. Confidence wavered. He turned his own cards. 2 pair. I won. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then it exploded. People shouting. Bets being collected. Absolute chaos. I stood slowly, smooth, graceful, looked at Nikolai, who was still sitting, processing. "Looks like you're going to have to marry me," I said, voice sweet as honey and dangerous as poison. Nikolai finally looked at me, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. "You," low voice, "dangerous, set this up." "No," I leaned in, resting my hands on the table. "You underestimated," I straightened. "Common mistake with women, I hear," Victor whispered urgently. "Boss, are you really going to—" Nikolai stood up, eyes fixed on me, jaw tense. I gave my word. I blinked, genuinely surprised. "Seriously?" He walked to me, dangerously close, heat radiating from him. "Nikolai Volkov doesn't break promises." Pause, penetrating eyes. "But you're going to regret this." I didn't back down, not an inch. "I doubt it." A predatory smile curved his lips. "I know who you are, Scarlett Ashford. Rebellious heiress. Black sheep." He leaned in until his lips were inches from my ear. "And now, my fiancé." I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from fear, from something much more dangerous. "Can't wait," I whispered back. When I left the club that night, with Lily practically running beside me, I knew two things. 1, I had just won the most important game of my life. 2, the real game was just beginning, and Scarlett Ashford never lost. Chapter 2, Consequences.
What did I do?
I woke up with my phone vibrating like it was having an epileptic seizure, and for one glorious second, I didn't remember anything, just felt the sun streaming through my bedroom curtains, and thought it would be a normal Saturday, until the memory hit like a runaway train, and I remembered I'd just gotten engaged to a Russian Mafia boss in a poker bet. Great. Excellent decision, Scarlett. I grabbed my phone and saw 47 unread messages, most from Lily in progressively escalating caps lock, starting with a polite, "OMG, did you get home okay?" and escalating to, "Scarlett Ashford, what did you do?" and ending with, "The press is going insane." I opened the browser and there it was, me on the front page of 3 different tabloids, and even on a serious news site that clearly had nothing better to report, because Ashford Iris engaged to crime king, was the headline in bold letters with a photo of me and Nikolai leaving the club, his hand on my back in a way that looked both protective and possessive at the same time, and me looking at the camera with that smile my mother always hated because she said it made me look too confident for a young lady. Well, Mom, now I was engaged to a mobster, so I guess too confident was the least of my problems. Lily called before I could fully process the entire situation, and I answered on the second ring because she deserved it after staying up all night clearly freaking out. "You're alive!" she practically screamed. "Good morning to you too. Scar, I'm looking at your face on 5 different news sites, and one of them used the word scandal 3 times in the first paragraph, so excuse me if I'm a little worried. Technically, it was his idea," I said, getting up and walking to the window, watching New York wake up below as if my life hadn't just been turned upside down. "He was the one who bet the marriage I just accepted and won." "You won, Scarlett. You actually beat Nikolai Volkov in a poker game, and now you're going to marry him, and I don't know if this is the most incredible or most insane thing you've ever done." "It can be both," I murmured. But my stomach was doing a weird thing because in the morning, with sunlight and reality hitting hard, it all seemed simultaneously completely surreal and terribly concrete. I was going to marry Nikolai Volkov, and not even I knew if it had been the most brilliant or most idiotic move of my life. Dad called at 9 a.m. sharp because Richard Ashford always woke up at 6, read all the newspapers at 7, and planned his attack strategy at 8. So 9 o'clock was the perfect time for a well-structured scolding. I answered because postponing the inevitable was never my style. "You got engaged to a criminal?" he roared, before I could even say hello. "Good morning, Dad. I'm fine too. Thanks for asking." "Scarlett, this isn't a joke. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Ashford family has a reputation. We have a name. We have hypocrisy," I cut in, my voice getting sharper than I intended, but honestly I was too tired to pretend. "You literally tried to marry me off to Edmund's son last night, and now you're upset because I did exactly what you wanted. Got engaged to someone. To a mobster, Scarlett. Technically, you're the one who wanted me married." I sat on the edge of the bed, examining my nails with fake indifference. "Now I'm engaged like you asked, Dad. You should be happy." "Happy? Happy? You just destroyed years of work to keep the Ashford name respectable." "Oh, yes, respectable," I laughed without humor, because forcing your daughter to marry a man who thinks women exist to decorate living rooms is super respectable. Edmund's son is a gentleman from a traditional family. Edmund's son is a pompous idiot who told me on our first date that I thought too much for a woman. My voice was rising now and I didn't care. "And you wanted me to marry him, wanted me to spend the rest of my life smiling and agreeing while he made all the decisions. Scarlett, and you know what else? I continued, all the frustrations of years finally coming out. Nikolai Volkov might be many things, might be dangerous and criminal and whatever you want to call him, but at least he respects me enough to play poker with me as an equal. He didn't treat me like decoration, or like something too fragile to think for herself. Silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost see my father processing, the vein in his forehead pulsing the way it always pulsed when I left him without arguments, when I said truths he didn't want to hear. "You have 24 hours, he finally said, voice dangerously controlled. 24 hours to end this absurdity, and come home." "Or what?" I challenged, because I'd already gone too far to back down now. "Or there will be consequences, Scarlett, you can be sure of that." He hung up before I could respond, and I stared at the phone in my hand, heart pounding hard in my chest, because my father's threats were never empty. He always kept his promises, and consequences in his vocabulary could mean anything from cutting off my access to family funds to something much worse. But the strange thing was that along with the fear came also a feeling of freedom, as if finally, after years of suffocation, I had truly breathed, even if the air was thin and scary. Lily called 3 seconds later. "I heard shouting through the wall," she said, because of course she was in the apartment next door. Always was when I needed her. "Are you okay?" Honestly, I took a deep breath. "I don't know. Want me to come over?" "No. I have a date with my mobster fiancé, apparently." The word fiancé still sounded surreal in my mouth. "But thanks, Lils. Anything. Anytime, you know." "I know." And I did. Lily had been the only constant in my chaotic life, and it was good to know that at least one person was unconditionally on my side. I hung up and started getting ready, choosing clothes carefully because meeting Nikolai on his territory required strategy, required armor, even if the armor was just a well-cut dress, and confidence I wasn't entirely sure I felt. The car arrived at noon, black and polished and completely intimidating, with a driver who didn't smile but opened the door with professional efficiency and said only, "Miss Ashford," as if taking me to meet my mobster fiancé was the most normal thing in the world. Maybe in his world it was. The ride was silent, and I spent the whole time looking out the window, watching the city pass by, and wondering when exactly my life had become a Mafia romance movie, because 24 hours ago, I was having dinner with a family that hated me, and now I was going to the house of the man I was going to marry, and I didn't even know if he had a sense of humor, or if he slept with a gun under his pillow. Probably both. The penthouse was, wow, there really was no other word, because the private elevator opened directly into a space that looked like it came from an architecture magazine, all glass and clean lines and a view of New York that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. "This is, wow," I said, stepping out of the elevator and turning slowly to absorb everything. Nikolai was near the window, his back to me, hands in the pockets of his black dress pants and white shirt without a tie, sleeves rolled up on his forearms in a way that should be illegal, because it made me notice things I definitely shouldn't be noticing about a man who was technically just my paper fiancé. He turned when he heard me, and for a second something crossed his face, surprise maybe or something softer, before returning to that controlled mask. "Wow," he repeated, one eyebrow raised. "It's beautiful." I touched an abstract sculpture near the entrance, fingers tracing the smooth lines of cold metal. "You have good taste? Didn't expect that from someone who makes a living intimidating people." "I don't intimidate," he said, approaching with those silent steps that were probably part of how to be an efficient mobster training. "I just persuade with guns, sometimes," he admitted, and the corner of his mouth curved in an almost smile that made my stomach do that weird thing again. "But usually my reputation does the work." "Must be exhausting," I commented, turning to look at the view that honestly took my breath away, the entire city spread out below like a chessboard, maintaining that whole image of dangerous and unreachable man. "You have no idea." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, and when I looked, he was closer than I expected, watching me in that intense way that seemed to see through all the layers I built so carefully. "We need to talk," he finally said, breaking the moment, "about how you lost to the weaker sex." I provoked, because provocation was safe. Provocation was familiar, and I knew how to do it with my eyes closed. "About the marriage," he said, ignoring my jab. "Sit." I sat on the couch that probably cost more than a car, and Nikolai stood initially, which was clearly a power play, but I let it pass, because choosing your battles was something I'd learned very early. You don't survive in a family like mine without knowing when to fight, and when to just observe. "Look," I started before he could speak, before he could establish the rules of his game. "I don't want to complicate your life. I swear, I paused, choosing words carefully. I needed an out, and you offered one, even if unintentionally. Vulnerability wasn't my strong suit, but something in that space, in the afternoon light coming through the huge windows and the way he was looking at me like he really wanted to understand, made it feel safe to be honest for the first time in a long time. Your family? He said, not as a question but as a statement, as if he already knew the answer. They wanted to marry me off to a man who literally told me that women look prettier when they agree with everything. On our first date, I looked at my hands, fingers interlaced in my lap, and my father completely supported it, said he was a good match and that I should feel lucky someone like him was interested. They're idiots, Nikolai said with such conviction, such absolute certainty that I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised me. You already said that yesterday. Still true? He finally sat, but kept a respectful distance on the other side of the couch, respecting my space in a way men rarely did. But we still need to establish boundaries. Boundaries, I repeated, curious about where this was going, because Nikolai Volkov didn't seem like the type of man who established boundaries. He seemed like the type who simply took what he wanted. This is a paper marriage. Convenience, he said, voice becoming more formal, more distant, as if reciting something he'd rehearsed. You get out from under your family's thumb, gain independence, and he paused, looking at some point beyond me. Get what? I asked, genuinely curious now. A trophy wife who impresses rivals? Someone to appear in photos and make you seem more domesticated? Something like that, he admitted. But something in his expression, in the way his eyes diverted for a fraction of a second, told me there was more he wasn't saying. So rules. 1. Separate lives. Each does what they want without interference. 2. No interference in each other's business. You don't ask about what I do, and I don't question your choices. 3. No. Expectations. Expectations. I tested the word on my tongue, watching him. You're going to have to be more specific because expectations is a pretty broad word. He looked visibly uncomfortable, and it was kind of adorable in a strange way to see a man who commanded a criminal empire without blinking, who had probably done things I didn't even want to imagine, get awkward talking about feelings. Emotional, he finally said, each word coming out with effort. Or physical. Oh, I understood, and ignored completely the way my stomach sank a little with the clarity of that, with the confirmation that this was purely transactional. Relax, Nikolai. I'm not in love with you if that's what worries you. Yet, he repeated my word from the car, eyes narrowing slightly. That was a joke. I rolled my eyes, but there was a part of me that wondered if it really was. And you're not in love with me either, clearly. So I think we're safe from that specific complication. Exactly. He agreed too quickly, with too much conviction. No complications. We keep everything simple and clear. No complications, I repeated, extending my hand formally. Deal then, Mr. Volkov. He shook my hand, and again that inexplicable electricity, that moment where the world got a little slower and more focused, and I wondered if he felt it too, if his heart accelerated the same way mine did. But then he let go, and went back to being the distant and controlled Nikolai Volkov, safe and predictable. You'll move in here, he said, not as a question. Will I? I raised an eyebrow. Is that an order or suggestion? Couples live together, Princessa. He used that nickname again, and I hated to admit I liked the sound. And if we want this to seem real, you need to be here. Separate bedrooms, I said quickly, obviously. And I keep my privacy. You don't go through my things. I don't snoop. He looked offended. I respect boundaries. A mobster who respects boundaries, I murmured. Interesting contradiction. I'm full of contradictions, he said, standing up and going to the bar in the corner, grabbing 2 glasses. Want a drink? Celebrate our union of convenience? Why not? I accepted, because honestly, after the morning I'd had, a drink seemed like exactly what I needed. He poured something that looked like expensive whiskey and returned, handing me a glass before raising his. To complications we won't have, he toasted, and to boundaries we'll respect, I completed, touching my glass to his. We drank, and the liquid burned going down, but it was a good burn, one that warmed from the inside and made the world seem a little less scary. So, I said after a moment, when's the civil ceremony? Next week, it's already being organized. Efficient. I don't waste time. Clearly, I looked at him, really looked, trying to decipher the man behind the reputation. Can I ask you something? You can ask. I don't guarantee I'll answer. Why did you honor the bet? The question had bothered me since yesterday. You could have laughed it off and forgotten. I was a stranger who provoked you in a club, but you're actually going to marry me just because you gave your word? Nikolai looked at me for a long moment, gray eyes studying my face as if searching for something specific. My word is all I have, he finally said. In my world, reputation is currency, and if I break a promise, even one made as a joke, I lose credibility, and without credibility, I'm nothing. So it's just about reputation, I pressed, because something told me there was more. No, he admitted, voice low. You intrigued me. Still intrigued me, and maybe part of me wanted to see what would happen if I actually did this. Raw and unexpected honesty. I intrigued you, I repeated, unable to hold back the smile. The great Nikolai Volkov intrigued by a rebellious heiress. Don't let it go to your head, Princessa. But he was smiling too, small and genuine, and in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement of convenience was going to be much more interesting than I'd imagined. Some time had passed, and a dinner was about to happen. The dinner was his idea, a performance for the press and for the families. A look. We're a normal couple of engaged people in love, even though we both knew it was pure and calculated performance. The restaurant was absurdly fancy, one of those where the menu doesn't have prices, and the maître d' looks at you as if evaluating whether you're worthy of breathing the same air as the other customers. And Nikolai arrived right on time, picking me up with that ridiculous car and a suit that probably cost more than a small country's GDP. "You look beautiful," he said when I got in the car, and it sounded so uncomfortable, so rehearsed that I couldn't hold back the laugh. "You sound like you're in pain," I teased, adjusting the navy blue dress I'd chosen specifically because it was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated without screaming, "Look at me." "I'm trying," he said through gritted teeth, and for the first time I saw real frustration on his face, as if giving compliments was physically painful. Something softened in my chest, and without thinking much, I took his hand that rested on the seat between us, squeezing lightly. "Then try to smile," I suggested gently, voice softer than intended. "For real, not that scary thing you do when you want to intimidate people." He looked at me, really looked, eyes traveling across my face as if memorizing every detail, and then at my hand in his, small and delicate compared to his, which was large and full of scars that probably had stories I'd never know. And then he really tried, his lips curving in a small but genuine smile that transformed his entire face, taking away years of tension and hardness, and making him look almost human, almost accessible. "Better," I said, smiling back and feeling my heart do that weird thing. "Almost human. You're impossible," he murmured, but didn't let go of my hand, his fingers interlacing with mine in a way that should seem casual but didn't, seemed intentional and warm, and completely off script. The dinner was strangely pleasant in a way that caught me completely off guard, because I'd gone expecting tension and discomfort and that feeling of performing, but instead I fell into that easy conversation that arose naturally, him telling me about how he'd built his empire literally from scratch, coming from Russia with nothing and transforming it into something that made powerful people tremble. "You're not just muscle and threats," I observed, after he finished a particularly impressive story about negotiating with the Italian Mafia. "You're smart. Strategic." "Surprised?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "A little," I admitted honestly. "The reputation paints you as just brute force." "Brute force has its place," he said, taking a sip of wine, "but building an empire requires brains, patience, knowing when to push and when to pull back. Like poker." "Exactly like poker," he agreed, eyes gleaming, "which is why you impressed me so much that night. You didn't play with emotion. You played with pure logic. MIT taught me well. Tell me about it." He leaned forward, genuinely interested. "About MIT, about you choosing math when your family clearly expected you to, what, marry young, be a decorative wife?" And I told him, sharing stories I rarely shared with anyone, about how I'd fought to convince my father to let me go to MIT, how I'd been the only woman in several classes, and how I'd proven everyone wrong repeatedly until they stopped underestimating me. Nikolai listened with complete attention, asking intelligent questions and laughing at the right moments, and there was something intensely intimate about being truly heard, about having someone interested not in my appearance or the family name, but in who I really was. The waiter clearly thought we were a real couple, commenting how it was lovely to see young people so in love these days, and neither of us corrected him because what was the point? This was exactly the image we wanted to project. But when our eyes met after the waiter left, there was something in Nikolai's gaze that didn't seem entirely like acting. "You're good at this," he said when we were alone again, voice low and serious in a way that made shivers run down my spine. "At what?" "Making people believe." He studied me through the soft candlelight that made shadows dance on his face. "What you want them to see, you build this persona, and people buy it completely." The observation was too accurate, too true, cutting straight through the layers of protection I'd built so carefully over the years. "Survival skill," I admitted quietly, vulnerability leaking into my voice. "When you grow up being underestimated, being seen as pretty but empty decoration, you learn to control the narrative, to show only what you want them to see." "I understand that," he said, voice rough with unspoken emotion. "More than you imagine, Princessa." Our eyes locked across the table, the distance between us seeming simultaneously enormous and non-existent, and something passed between us in that moment, something real and scary and completely unexpected, a connection that went beyond the paper agreement we'd made. I should look away, should break the moment, should remember the rules about no emotional expectations, but I couldn't. I was trapped in that steel-gray gaze that seemed to see much more than I wanted to show. Should we order dessert? I finally managed to say, breaking the spell, because this was getting too dangerous. Do you like sweets? Nikolai asked, and his voice was a tone rougher than before. Love them, I smiled, returning to the safe territory of light teasing. Compensates for my bitter personality. You're not bitter, he said seriously, picking up the dessert menu but keeping his eyes on me. No. He looked at me over the menu, intense and honest. You're interesting, challenging, intelligent, irritating sometimes, but never bitter. And somehow that, coming from him, from that man who clearly didn't throw compliments around easily, sounded like the most sincere thing anyone had ever said to me, better than all the times professors praised my intelligence with condescending surprise, or people commented on my appearance as if it were my only valuable quality. Thank you, I said, genuine for the first time in a long time, feeling warmth rise to my face. You're welcome, princess. And when he smiled, small and true, and just for me, I realized with growing horror that maybe those rules about not having emotional expectations were going to be much harder to follow than I'd imagined. Because Nikolai Volkov was dangerous, I'd always known that, but not in the way I expected. He wasn't dangerous because he commanded a criminal empire, or because he had a reputation that made grown men tremble. He was dangerous because he was starting to make me want things that definitely weren't part of the deal, starting to make my heart race when he smiled that way, starting to make me wonder what it would be like if this was all real, instead of just performance. And that, more than anything else, scared me completely. We left the restaurant with his hand on my back, guiding me protectively through the crowd of paparazzi who'd appeared out of nowhere, cameras flashing and voices shouting questions we completely ignored. In the car, I could still feel the warmth of his hand, could still see that genuine smile. And when I got home that night, lying in bed looking at the ceiling, all I could think was that I'd just made a very dangerous deal. And the scariest part, I wasn't sure if I regretted it. Chapter 3, Dangerous Games.
This is just business.
The civil ceremony happened on a rainy Tuesday with exactly 7 people present, because apparently when you marry a Russian mobster, the guest list is strategic instead of sentimental. So there was me, Nikolai, Victor as his witness, Lily as my witness, the judge who was clearly being paid very well not to ask questions, and 2 security guards at the door who were probably there more to make sure nobody shot anybody than for traditional wedding security. Romantic? No. Efficient? Absolutely. I wore a simple white dress because even though it was a fake wedding, there was something in me that refused to do this in jeans. And when Nikolai saw me waiting in the judge's small office, something crossed his face, too fast for me to fully identify, but that looked suspiciously like admiration before returning to that controlled mask. You look beautiful, he said quietly while the judge prepared the papers. And this time it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded sincere in a way that made my stomach flip. Thank you, I murmured back. And then we were in front of the judge saying, I do to vows we didn't write, and promising things we didn't intend to keep, except that when Nikolai slid the ring on my finger, looking straight into my eyes with an intensity that seemed very real, for a second I forgot it was just performance. The kiss was chaste, quick, just a touch of lips that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but was time enough for me to feel the heat of him, the way his fingers squeezed my waist lightly. And when we separated, there was something in his gaze that made me think maybe he'd also forgotten it was fake for a moment. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Volkov, the judge said, and hearing Mrs. Volkov out loud made everything feel surreally concrete. Lily hugged me tight, whispering, "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" in my ear, and I whispered back, "Absolutely not, because honesty with your best friend was important, even when you were lying to literally everyone else." Moving into the penthouse was strangely simple, considering I was literally moving my entire life. But I discovered that when you grow up in a family that makes you feel more like a guest than a resident, you don't accumulate many sentimental things. So it was 3 suitcases of clothes, 2 boxes of books, my laptop, and a plant that Lily had given me years ago and that miraculously was still alive. "Is this everything?" Nikolai asked when the security guards finished bringing up my things, looking at the few suitcases with an expression I couldn't decipher. "I travel light," I responded with fake lightness, not wanting to get into the dangerous territory of explaining why I didn't have roots anywhere. But he looked at me in that way of his, as if seeing through the words to the truth underneath, and simply said, "Your room is this way," without pressing, which somehow made my chest tighten more than if he'd asked questions. The room was ridiculously large, with a king-size bed and a closet that could easily fit my entire old apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city, and a private bathroom that had a bathtub big enough to swim in. And all of this was on the opposite side of the penthouse from Nikolai's room, because boundaries and personal space and all those rules we made, If you need anything, just ask, Nikolai said from the doorway, hands in his pockets in that casual way he did that hid tension. Thank you. I looked around, processing that this was my home now, at least temporarily. It's perfect. Welcome home, Princessa, he said, and there was something warm in his voice that made the nickname sound less like teasing and more like affection. After he left, I sat on the absurdly comfortable bed and looked at the ring on my finger that still felt strange and heavy, and wondered not for the first time what exactly I had started. I discovered quickly that living with Nikolai Volkov was like playing constant chess where every move had double meaning and every conversation was a careful dance between provocation and truth. He worked most of the day from home, locked in the office on calls I pretended not to hear, and meetings with suited men who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and cautious respect, because I was the woman who had defeated their boss at poker. I'd started working remotely as a financial risk consultant, using my MIT degree to finally do something useful, and it was strangely pleasant to have a routine that didn't involve pleasing my family or pretending to be someone I wasn't. Mornings were the most interesting territory of our delicate coexistence. Nikolai woke up early, always at 6, I discovered, because I heard him in the kitchen trying to be quiet and failing spectacularly. And usually I stayed in my room until he left for the office, because mornings were too vulnerable, too intimate for a fake marriage, until that Thursday, when I woke up to the smell of smoke. I jumped out of bed without thinking, running barefoot to the hallway, and following the smell to the kitchen, where I found Nikolai surrounded by a cloud of smoke, holding a burnt frying pan, and looking completely lost in a way that would have been hilarious, if it wasn't also kind of adorable. "What are you doing?" I asked, running to open windows while the fire alarm started beeping. "Trying to make breakfast," he said defensively, looking at the pan as if it had personally betrayed him. I thought it would be a nice gesture. Something melted in my chest because there was Nikolai Volkov, a man who commanded a criminal empire without blinking, completely defeated by scrambled eggs. "You almost set the kitchen on fire," I pointed out, but I was smiling as I turned off the alarm and took the pan from his hands. "The recipe on YouTube made it look easy." "You watched YouTube?" I couldn't hold back the laugh. "The great Nikolai Volkov watching cooking tutorials. Don't tell anyone," he murmured, but his lips curved in that almost smile I was starting to recognize. "It'll ruin my reputation." "Secret's safe," I promised, starting to clean up the mess. "But maybe next time you ask for help before trying to be a chef. Where's the fun in that?" We worked side by side, cleaning up his disaster, and somehow it ended up becoming the two of us making breakfast together, him cutting fruit with surprising precision while I made actual eggs. And there was something surprisingly domestic and comfortable about it that made me forget for a moment that this was all a temporary arrangement. When we finished, we ate at the kitchen counter laughing at something silly he said, and I didn't realize we were being watched until I heard Victor clear his throat at the entrance. "Boss, the reports you asked for." He stopped mid-sentence, looking between the two of us with an expression I couldn't fully decipher. "Thank you, Victor," Nikolai said, taking the papers without taking his eyes off me. "Leave them on the office desk." Victor nodded, but not before exchanging a look with Nikolai that seemed to carry an entire conversation in silence. And when he left, I could swear he was smiling knowingly. The tension between us grew each day in small and large ways. Like when I went out to the terrace on a Saturday morning wearing short shorts and a tank top because it was hot, and found Nikolai doing push-ups shirtless, all muscle and bronze skin and tattoos I didn't know he had, and when he saw me he stopped mid-movement, eyes traveling down my legs in a way that made heat rise through my entire body. "Is that what you normally wear?" he asked, voice rough. "Shorts?" I made my voice innocent. "Yes. Usually when it's hot, I wear clothes that won't make me die of heat. It's a revolutionary concept, I know. They're very short. You noticed?" I tilted my head, sweet provocation in my voice. "Impossible not to notice," he practically growled, and there was something in his gaze that made my stomach flip deliciously. "Well," I smiled, walking to the lounge chair. "You're welcome to stop looking any time. Easier said than done, Princessa." And with that, he went back to his push-ups, but I could feel his gaze on me while I pretended to read, electric tension in the air between us, that neither of us acknowledged out loud because acknowledging would be admitting, and admitting would be complicating, and complications were against the rules, but the rules were getting harder to remember each day. I learned to read Nikolai's moods in the small things, in the way his jaw got tenser when calls were difficult, how he rubbed the back of his neck when he was tired, the way his shoulders got rigid when he was worried about something he didn't say out loud. On a particularly bad night, after a meeting that lasted 4 hours, and involved a lot of shouting in Russian, I saw him on the living room couch, head back, eyes closed, exhaustion in every line of his body. I went to the kitchen silently and made Russian tea the way I'd researched online, adding the right spices and letting it steep for the exact time, and then left the steaming cup on the coffee table near him without saying a word, going back to my room before he could see me. 20 minutes later, I heard a light knock on my door. "Come in," I called, closing my laptop. Nikolai entered holding the empty cup, looking at me in a way that made my heart race. "You made Russian tea," he said, voice strangely hoarse. "I researched the recipe." I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "I thought you might want something familiar." "Why?" The simple question carried weight. "Because you seemed to need it," I answered honestly. "And because I care, I think." Something crossed his face, raw and unfiltered emotion that disappeared quickly, but not quickly enough. "Thank you," he finally said, simply, but it carried a sincerity that made my chest tighten. "Nobody's done something like that for me in a long time." "You're welcome," I murmured, and when he left, closing the door softly behind him, I stared at the empty space, wondering when exactly I'd stopped pretending not to care. The next day, I was in Nikolai's office, returning a book I'd borrowed when Victor came in for the morning briefing, and something in his expression when he saw me made me pause. "Good morning, Victor," I greeted, smiling. "Mrs. Volkov." He nodded respectfully, but there was an amused gleam in his eyes. I left the office, but not before hearing Victor say quietly to Nikolai, "Boss, can I say something? Depends on what it is. You look at her like she's oxygen." I stopped in the hallway, heart racing, waiting for Nikolai's response. "Victor," he started, warning tone. "No, seriously, boss, I've known you for 10 years and I've never seen you look at anyone that way. Like she's the only thing that matters in the world." "It's a marriage of convenience," Nikolai said, but his voice sounded less convincing than it probably intended. "Keep telling yourself that," Victor laughed quietly. "But every time she enters the room, you forget how to breathe for 2 seconds. And yesterday when she made that tea for you, boss, you stood staring at her door for 15 minutes after." "Enough," Nikolai cut him off, but didn't deny it. I left before they could catch me listening, but Victor's words kept echoing in my head all day, especially the part about Nikolai looking at me like I was oxygen, and I found myself wondering if it was true, if that tension I felt was reciprocal, or if it was just my imagination wanting it to be real when it wasn't. What I didn't know was that while I navigated the complicated waters of my fake marriage that was starting to seem very real, other people were paying attention too. In a warehouse on the other side of the city, Alexei Petrov studied photos of me and Nikolai spread across the table, fingers tracing my face in an image where Nikolai had his hand on my back, looking at me in a way that even in a photo seemed intense. "So that's her," he murmured to the man beside him. "Volkov's weakness. The marriage is just on paper, boss. Everyone knows that," the man responded. "You see these photos?" Alexei laughed without humor, the way he looks at her. "This isn't just paper, my friend. This is a man who found something worth more than his empire." He picked up a photo where I was smiling at the camera, completely unaware of the danger surrounding me. "And when you want to destroy a man like Nikolai Volkov," Alexei continued, voice becoming cold and calculating, "you don't attack the empire, you attack the heart. And now he finally has one that can be broken. What do you want us to do?" Alexei smiled, predator planning an attack. "Watch her. Learn the routine, the people close to her, especially that friend. Lily, is that it? We're going to need her. For what? To lure our dear Mrs. Volkov where we want her." Alexei threw the photo back on the table. "And when we have her, Nikolai will have to choose between empire and heart. And whatever choice he makes, we win." Completely unaware of the storm forming in the shadows, I went to the social event that night wearing a red dress that Nikolai looked at for a suspiciously long time, before saying only, "Beautiful," with a hoarse voice that made butterflies dance in my stomach. The charity gala was full of New York's elite who were clearly dying of curiosity about me and Nikolai, the scandalous union between society and organized crime. The night was going relatively well, me smiling and waving and being the perfectly polite wife, until an older man approached while Nikolai was getting drinks. "So you're the famous Mrs. Volkov," he said, eyes traveling down my body in a way that made my skin crawl for the wrong reason. "I must say, Volkov has good taste in property." "Excuse me." I kept my voice polite but cold. "Well, you're clearly just pretty decoration." He laughed in that condescending way I knew too well. "Leave business to the men, dear. Just smile and look pretty because that's what you're for." Anger boiled in my chest, but before I could respond, a solid presence appeared behind me, and a large hand landed possessively on my waist. "Say that again," Nikolai said, voice dangerously low. The man paled. "I was just... My wife," Nikolai practically spat the word, "has a degree from MIT in applied mathematics, an IQ probably higher than yours and mine combined, and could probably destroy you financially before breakfast if she wanted to." He took a step forward, and I could see muscles tensing. Saw the exact moment he decided he was going to break something, probably the guy's nose or his hand or both. "Nikolai," I touched his arm lightly, feeling muscles hard as stone under the suit. "I can defend myself." He looked at me, fury still burning in his gray eyes. "I know you can," he said, voice still tense, "but you shouldn't have to." Something melted completely in my chest with that, with his fury not being about me being weak, but about someone disrespecting me. "But thank you," I added softly, fingers squeezing his arm, "for wanting to defend my honor like a chivalrous husband." The tension left his shoulders slowly, and he turned to me, completely ignoring the man who was practically running away. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "You're my wife, even if it's—" He paused. "An arrangement," I offered. "Even so," he finished, eyes on mine. "Nobody talks to you like that." And there, in the middle of a room full of people, with lights and music and whispers around us, the two of us stood looking at each other, and I saw on his face the same recognition I felt growing in me, that maybe this wasn't just an arrangement anymore, that maybe it never had been. And that realization was terrifying and exciting in equal measures, especially when I had no idea that in the shadows, someone was already planning to use these growing feelings against us. Chapter 4, Cracks.
I expected this.
The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a formal messenger with an embossed paper envelope. I recognized immediately because I'd seen that crest my whole life on Ashford family correspondence. I opened it with fingers that didn't tremble because I'd learned very early not to show weakness, even when alone, and read the formal, cold words that basically said I was no longer heir to anything, that my name had been removed from all legal documents, that for marrying a criminal element against family values, I had been officially disinherited. Effective immediately. Signed, Richard Ashford. Not even Dad at the end. I stared at the paper for an indeterminate amount of time, processing the fact that my family had literally erased me from their existence, and the strange part was that I expected to feel more, expected anger or sadness or something strong, but all that came was cold emptiness and deep exhaustion from carrying the weight of a family that never wanted me. Nikolai was in meetings all day, so I had the penthouse to myself, which was good, because I didn't want company, didn't want to have to explain or pretend I was okay when I clearly wasn't. Lily called in the late afternoon. "Scar, I heard," my mom told me. "Are you okay?" "I'm great," I lied automatically. "Liar," she said gently. "Want me to come over?" "No, I just need to process alone." "You sure?" "Because I can be there in 20 minutes with ice cream and—" "Lily, I love you, but please just give me today. We'll talk tomorrow." She hesitated, but agreed, because she knew me well enough to know when I needed space. And when I hung up, I went straight to Nikolai's bar and grabbed the first expensive bottle I saw, not even caring what it was. Russian vodka, I discovered after the first sip that burned going down. Perfect. I don't know how much time passed or how many glasses I drank. I just know that when I heard the penthouse door open and Nikolai's footsteps in the hallway, the world was spinning slightly, and my eyes were stinging with tears I'd sworn I wasn't going to shed. "Scarlett?" he called, and then he appeared in the living room entrance. Stopped completely when he saw me on the floor leaning against the couch with the half-empty bottle beside me. "What happened?" "My father disinherited me." The words came out slurred, more honest than I intended because of the alcohol lowering all defenses. "Officially, legally, completely, I don't exist anymore to the Ashford family." Nikolai crossed the room in 3 steps, kneeling in front of me, large hands holding my face with surprising gentleness. "You're drunk," he said, but there was no judgment in his voice, just concern. "A little," I admitted, and then the tears started for real, all the pain and rejection I'd swallowed my whole life coming out at once. "He erased me, Nikolai, like I never existed, like 27 years meant nothing." "Come here," he said softly, pulling me up and onto the couch, and suddenly I was in his lap, face buried in his chest, crying in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child. He didn't say anything for a long time, just held me with strong, secure arms, one hand making circles on my back while I soaked his expensive shirt with tears and probably smeared makeup, and there was something intensely comforting about being held like this, about not having to be strong for a moment. "They don't deserve you," he finally said, voice rough against my hair. "Your entire family doesn't deserve you, Princessa. They're blind and idiots, and you're so much better without them. I know that here." I touched my head. "But here," I touched my chest. "It still hurts." "I know." He squeezed tighter, and somehow I knew he really understood, that he had his own scars from family rejection too. I stayed like that for time I didn't measure, just breathing with him, feeling the solid warmth of him anchoring me when everything seemed to be falling apart. And when I finally looked up, our faces were so close, I could see the small darker spots in the gray of his eyes. "You're not as scary as you pretend to be," I whispered, fingers touching his face without thinking, tracing the line of his jaw. "Don't tell anyone," he said back, trying to sound light, but voice coming out thick with emotion. "Secret's safe," I promised, smiling through tears, and we stayed like that looking at each other until my eyes started closing on their own, exhaustion and alcohol finally winning. The last thing I remembered was him lifting me in his arms like I weighed nothing, carrying me to my room, and the soft kiss on my forehead before everything went completely dark. The next morning, I woke up with a massive headache and fragmented memories of the previous night, remembering in flashes crying in Nikolai's lap and saying things too vulnerable that I probably shouldn't have said. Great, excellent, nothing better than total fragility in front of my husband of convenience. I dragged myself out of bed, discovering that someone, probably Nikolai, had taken off my shoes and put a blanket over me, and there was a glass of water and headache medicine on the nightstand that definitely weren't there before. I took both gratefully and went to the bathroom, looking in the mirror at the disaster of smeared makeup and messy hair, and wondering how exactly I was going to face Nikolai after using him as an emotional pillow. But when I finally came out of the room after a long shower and clean clothes, I found him in the kitchen making coffee, and the tension I expected wasn't there. Instead, there was something different in the air between us, something softer and more real. "Good morning," he said without turning, but I could hear the smile in his voice. "How's the head?" "Surviving." I approached the counter. "Thanks for the medicine." "You're welcome." He turned, studying me carefully. "And about last night, I'm sorry," I cut in quickly, "for breaking down on you like that. I don't usually do that. It was just too much at once." "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "You were hurt and needed someone. I'm glad it was me." Something warm bloomed in my chest with that, with his sincerity, and without thinking much, I approached and hugged him, burying my face in his chest again. He went rigid for half a second before relaxing and hugging me back, and we stayed like that in the kitchen, illuminated by morning sun, just holding each other. And it was strange how something so simple could feel so important. "Coffee?" he offered when we separated, and there was something new in the way he looked at me, something more open. "Please." We worked side by side making breakfast, and there was a strange lightness between us now, as if crying in his lap had broken some barrier we'd been maintaining. And when music started playing from his phone that was on the counter, some soft Russian song, he extended his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. "There's no dance music," I pointed out, but was already taking his hand. "There's music enough." And then we were dancing without real technique or pattern, just turning slowly through the kitchen, my arms around his neck, and his around my waist, and it was silly and completely perfect at the same time. "Thank you," I murmured against his chest, "for last night, for not judging me or making me feel weak." "You're never weak," he said, pulling me closer. "You're the strongest person I know, Princessa, and if crying when you're hurt makes you weak, then everyone is." I looked up, and he was already looking down, and the distance between us was decreasing slowly, inevitably, until we were inches apart, breaths mixing, and I could see the exact moment he decided he was going to kiss me. My eyes started to close, heart beating irregularly, and then he pulled back, fast, as if burned. "I can't," he said, voice rough. "Not like this. Not when you're still vulnerable from yesterday. I won't take advantage of that." And God, his consideration, the respect, made my chest tighten in a completely different way. Because how many men would pull back like that? How many would put my well-being above what they clearly wanted? "Nikolai," I started, but didn't know what to say. "Sorry." He ran his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated with himself. "I just need a minute." And then he left the kitchen, leaving me alone with a racing heart and confused feeling of appreciation, mixed with sharp disappointment, because the truth was I wanted him to kiss me, wanted to feel his lips on mine, and realizing that was scary and revealing at the same time. The phone rang 2 hours later, unknown number that I almost didn't answer until I saw the message that came with it. "About your friend Lily," I answered with my heart racing. "Who is this?" "Mrs. Volkov," masculine voice with Russian accent. Unfamiliar. "What a pleasure to finally speak with you. Who are you and what do you want?" "My name is Alexei, and as for what I want, well, that's complicated. But for now, let's start simple. I have your friend." The world stopped. "Lily? You have Lily? Perfectly safe. For now." He sounded almost bored. "And she'll stay that way if you cooperate." "If you hurt her?" I started, terror and fury fighting for control. Calm, calm. "Nobody needs to get hurt," he interrupted. "This is just incentive for a conversation, let's say, between you, me, and your dear husband." "Nikolai," I whispered. "Exactly," Alexei laughed. "Bring him. Come to the warehouse at the South Dock. You have 2 hours. And Mrs. Volkov, come alone, or your friend pays the price." He hung up. I stared at the phone, mind racing, and then I was running to Nikolai's office, entering without knocking, him looking up surprised from the video meeting he was having. "Scarlett, I'm in." "Alexei has Lily." I cut him off, and I saw the exact moment everything in him became dangerous and focused. "He wants us to go to the warehouse at the South Dock. 2 hours. Alone." Nikolai stood up, already grabbing his phone. "Victor, code red. We need a team," he started. "He said alone," I interrupted. "Said if we bring anyone, she pays the price." Our eyes met across the office, and I saw in them the same determination I felt running through my veins. "Then we go alone," he said simply, "but we go prepared." And in that moment, looking at him already planning strategy and protecting me at the same time. I realized that it didn't matter what we'd started as, didn't matter the rules we made. We were a team now, and we were going to bring Lily back, together. Chapter 5, The Explosion.
I'm not backing down!
The warehouse at the South Dock smelled of salt and rust and danger, and as we followed Victor through the shadows toward the side entrance, my heart was beating so hard I was certain everyone could hear it, but I kept my face calm because panicking now wouldn't help Lily at all. Nikolai had insisted I stay in the car, obviously, had practically ordered with that authoritative voice that probably worked on everyone except me. No way, I'd said on the way over, checking for the third time the gun Victor had given me. Lily is my best friend, I'm going. Scarlett, it's dangerous, and I know how to shoot. I cut him off, looking at him with determination that didn't allow for discussion. MIT has a shooting club, and I was captain for 2 years. So you can take me with you, or you can watch me break in alone. Your choice. He'd looked at me for a long moment before sighing in defeat, and something that looked suspiciously like pride flashed in his eyes before he nodded and said, "Stay behind me then. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" Understood, I lied, because there was no chance I was running if he was in danger, but he didn't need to know that yet. Now we were here, infiltrating Alexei's territory with Victor, and 3 of Nikolai's men he'd insisted on bringing despite the threat, positioned strategically around the perimeter while we entered through the least guarded path. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of containers and stacked boxes creating perfect shadows for ambush, and I kept the gun steady in my hands, even with adrenaline making every nerve vibrate because Lily was here somewhere, and I was going to find her. We heard voices first, harsh Russian echoing between metal, and Nikolai signaled for us to stop, moving with predatory silence toward the sound. And then we saw her. Lily was tied to a chair in the center of an open space, face pale but no visible injuries, thank God, and Alexei was near her smoking a cigarette with 3 armed men around them, clearly waiting for us. "I knew you'd come," Alexei said without even turning, as if sensing our presence. "The great Nikolai Volkov can't resist a dramatic rescue. Let her go." Nikolai stepped out of the shadows, gun pointed but voice too calm, too dangerous. "This is between us. She has nothing to do with it." "Ah, but she does." Alexei finally turned, smiling in that way that made my skin crawl. "She's bait, and it worked perfectly. Brought both you and your beautiful wife." His eyes found mine in the shadows where I was still hidden, and the smile widened. "Mrs. Volkov, what a pleasure to finally meet in person." No point in hiding now, so I stepped out too, gun steady even with fear pulsing, and positioned myself beside Nikolai, who looked at me with something that seemed like horror and admiration mixed. "Let her go," I repeated Nikolai's words. "Now," Alexei laughed. "Or what? The little princess is going to shoot me." "If I have to," I responded with a calm I didn't feel. Everything happened too fast after that. One of Alexei's men moved. Victor shouted a warning, and then gunfire exploded around us with the deafening noise of metal against metal. And I was moving on pure instinct, shooting club training taking over as I aimed and fired with precision that surprised even myself. I saw Nikolai duck behind a container, exchanging shots with 2 men, and then a third appeared on his side. An angle he couldn't see, gun raising, and I didn't think, just acted. I aimed, breathed, and fired. The man fell before he could shoot. "You know how to shoot?" Nikolai yelled over the noise, looking between me and the fallen man with an expression of total shock. "MIT has a shooting club," I yelled back, running to him while Victor's men dealt with the rest of Alexei's guards. "Are you okay?" I helped him up, hands checking for injuries, even knowing there wasn't time. "Now I am," he said, looking at me in a completely different way, as if seeing me for the first time for real. And then he was pulling me behind cover while more shots echoed. It took 5 more chaotic minutes, but finally silence fell. Alexei's guards neutralized, and Alexei himself fleeing through the back exit like the coward he was. And I was running to Lily, cutting the ropes, binding her with hands trembling from residual adrenaline. "You came," she cried, hugging me tight. "I knew you would, but God's scar, you could have died. Not without saving you first," I whispered back, holding her tight until Nikolai touched my shoulder gently. "We need to leave," he said quietly, "before Alexei comes back with reinforcements." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of Victor taking Lily to her place with bodyguards, while Nikolai and I went up in the elevator in tense silence, adrenaline still running hot in our veins, making every sense too intense, too sharp. The doors barely closed behind us before Nikolai was turning me around, hands on my shoulders, eyes traveling over every inch of of my body with almost painful intensity. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, fingers already checking for injuries I didn't have. "Any scratches? Anything?" "Nikolai, I'm fine. Are you sure?" He cut me off, still examining me as if he didn't believe it. And there was something wild in his gaze, something desperate. "Because you threw yourself in the middle of a shootout and you could have been hit and Hey, I touched his face, forcing him to really look at me, to see that I was whole and safe. "I'm fine. You're fine too. We did it. We saved her. You could have died," he said, voice breaking on the last word, hands squeezing my waist as if he needed to feel me solid and real to believe it. But I didn't. I responded softly, fingers tracing the tense line of his jaw. "And neither did you. We're fine. And we make a good team, didn't we find out?" Something changed in his gaze with those words, something dark and intense and completely consuming. "We do," he agreed, voice hoarse. And then he was pulling me to him and kissing me like I was oxygen and he was drowning. The kiss was everything the almost kiss in the kitchen hadn't been. It was desperate and explosive and completely reciprocal, because I was kissing back with the same urgency, fingers burying in his hair while he pressed me against the wall, body solid and warm against mine. "Scarlet," he murmured against my lips, hands already pulling my shirt up. "Tell me to stop if you don't want this." "Don't stop," I whispered back, pulling him closer. "Please don't stop." And he didn't stop. Carried me to his room this time, different from all the rules we made about separate bedrooms and no expectations. And when we fell into bed together, there was nothing calculated or arranged. It was just the two of us, real and raw and completely consumed by each other. The night was intense and consensual and absolutely perfect. Every touch burning patterns on skin, every kiss promising things neither of us said out loud. And when I finally fell asleep in his arms, completely exhausted and completely satisfied, the last thing I thought was that maybe the fake marriage had become the most real thing in my life. I woke up alone. The first thing I noticed was coldness where Nikolai's warm body should be, and I opened my eyes to find empty, rumpled sheets, faint dawn light coming through the huge windows. I sat up slowly, pulling the sheet to cover my body while searching for him in the room, but it was empty, silent except for the distant sound of movement in the living room. Something tightened in my chest, instinct saying something was wrong even before I dressed quickly and went out to the hallway, finding Nikolai in the living room looking out the window with a rigid posture I hadn't seen since before we really got to know each other. "Good morning," I tried, voice coming out more hesitant than intended. He turned, and the expression on his face made my stomach sink because it was the mask again, distant and cold, and completely closed off. "That was a mistake," he said without preamble, voice flat. "What?" I blinked, processing, hoping I'd heard wrong. "Last night, the night it shouldn't have happened." Each word came out precise and cutting like glass. "Calm first. Always calm when the world is falling apart." I took a deep breath before asking, "Why?" "We have an agreement," he said, still not really looking at me. "No complications, remember? And last night was a complication." The word came out like an accusation and hurt more than any physical slap could, reducing the most incredible night of my life to an inconvenient problem. "Complication," I repeated, and it was impressive how I managed to keep my voice steady. "I see. Scarlet," he started, finally looking at me, and there was something in his gaze, something that looked like pain, but I didn't want to see it, didn't want to feel sorry for him when he was breaking me. "No," I raised my hand, dignity being the only thing keeping me together. "You made it clear it was just adrenaline, heat of the moment. Forget it." I forced a smile that probably looked more like a grimace, and turned before he could see tears starting to form, walking to my room with measured and controlled steps. "Scarlet, wait," but I closed the door gently behind me, not slamming because slamming would show emotion, and I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. And then I was sliding down the back of the door to the floor, hugging my knees to my chest while trying to breathe through the pain. Outside, I heard Victor's voice. "Boss, don't," Nikolai cut him off. "You just destroyed the best thing that happened to you," Victor said anyway, voice carrying disappointment. "I know!" Nikolai exploded, and I could hear him pacing, agitated. "But I can't. She can't. She deserves better than this. Than me. I don't know how to do this. How to be what she needs. Then learn," Victor said simply. Silence after that, and I stayed there on my bedroom floor processing that Nikolai Volkov, a man who faced mafias and shootouts without blinking, was afraid of us, of feelings, of the possibility of something real. And the worst part? Part of me understood, because I was also terrified of the intensity of what I felt. But the difference was, I would have been brave enough to try. He wasn't, and that hurt more than any family rejection, more than disinheritance, because for the first time in a long time, I had let someone truly in, and he had thrown it away as if it meant nothing. Chapter 6. Consequences.
I understand.
The following 3 days were an exercise in self-control. I didn't know I had, because every fiber of my being wanted to scream at Nikolai or cry, or make some dramatic scene that showed how much he'd hurt me. But instead I chose dignity, chose to be polite and kind and absolutely distant in a way that probably hurt more than any drama would. I moved back to my separate room that same night, carrying my pillows and some clothes back while he watched from the door of his own room with an expression I refused to analyze because it didn't matter anymore what he felt when he'd made it so clear he didn't want this, didn't want us. The routine we established was strange and painful in its artificial normalcy. I still woke up early and made his coffee in the morning because there was something in me that couldn't stop even knowing I should, but instead of staying and talking like we did before, I simply left the cup in the usual place and went back to my room, or went for a run or anything that kept me away from him. "Good morning," he tried on the first morning, voice cautious when he saw me placing the coffee on the table. "Good morning," I responded politely, already turning to leave. "Scarlett, can we talk? I have a work meeting in 15 minutes, I lied smoothly, without looking back. "But thanks for the coffee yesterday. It was good." This became the pattern, him trying to start conversations, and me deflecting gently but firmly, because what was there to talk about? He'd made clear where we stood, and I wasn't going to beg for scraps of attention, or try to convince someone to want me. I'd spent my whole life doing that with my family, and I wasn't going to repeat the mistake. Lily came to visit on the second day, finding me in my room working on my laptop with fierce determination she immediately recognized as a defense mechanism. "You're avoiding feelings again?" she said without preamble, throwing herself on the bed beside me. "I'm working," I corrected, without taking my eyes off the screen. "Scar, you worked 16 hours yesterday," Victor told me, "and Nikolai is apparently destroying the punching bag in the gym, so you two are clearly fine." I closed the laptop with a sigh, because Lily never gave up when she decided we needed to talk. "He made clear what he wants," I finally said, looking at my hands. "And it's not me, so I'm respecting that." "He's an idiot," Lily declared with conviction. "And you know it. He likes you, Scar. Anyone with eyes can see it." "Liking isn't enough," I responded quietly, vulnerability leaking despite my efforts. "He treated me like a mistake, like that night, like I was nothing, just an inconvenient complication. He's scared, and I'm not." I looked at her finally, letting her see the pain I'd been hiding. "I'm terrified, Lily, because for the first time in a long time I let someone truly in and he just threw it away, and now I have to live with him and pretend it doesn't hurt when it hurts so much that sometimes I can barely breathe." She hugged me tight, and we stayed like that for a long time, until the tears stopped and I could breathe again, without feeling like I was drowning. The event happened on the third day, a charity gala I'd completely forgotten about until Nikolai mentioned at breakfast that we needed to go together to keep up appearances, and I agreed because it was part of the original deal. Paper wife who shows up at events and smiles for cameras. I wore an emerald green dress I knew looked good and put my hair up elegantly, full armor to face society and photographers, and especially him. And when I came out of my room, I found Nikolai waiting in a dark suit that made his eyes seem even more gray. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, and there was so much emotion in his voice that my heart squeezed before I remembered it didn't matter. "Thank you," I responded politely. "We should go. We don't want to be late." The event was like always, full of important people pretending to care about causes when they really just wanted to be seen, and I was on autopilot smiling and waving when a man approached, young and conventionally handsome with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Volkov," he said, taking my hand and kissing it lightly. "I'm Marcus Whitmore. Pleasure to finally meet you." "The pleasure is mine," I responded with automatic politeness the Ashford family had drilled into me, gently withdrawing my hand. "I must say, photos don't do you justice," he continued, clearly flirting in a not very subtle way. "You're even more stunning in person." "Very kind." I smiled without real warmth, because I could see the game, recognize an attempt at flirting, even though I wasn't remotely interested. But being polite cost nothing. "Are you involved with the foundation?" While he talked about philanthropic work that was probably more about image than real interest, I kept an attentive expression and asked appropriate questions, because this was a skill I'd mastered, making people feel heard and important, even when my mind was elsewhere. What I didn't notice was Nikolai watching from afar with an expression Victor later told me was absolutely murderous. Marcus finally said goodbye after getting my business card under the pretense of discussing investment opportunities, and as soon as he left, a familiar and tense presence appeared beside me. "Having fun?" Nikolai asked, voice dangerously controlled. "It's a pleasant event," I responded neutrally, taking a champagne flute from a passing waiter. "He was flirting with you. He was being polite." "Scarlett," he started, some emotion leaking through the control. "Excuse me," I cut in gently. "I'm going to greet the organizer. See you later." I walked away before he could respond, conscious of his eyes burning into my back, but refusing to turn around because I didn't owe him anything, didn't owe explanations about who I talked to, or how I reacted to innocent flirting from a stranger. I found Victor near the bar a few minutes later, him studying me with an expression I knew too well. "He's furious," Victor commented casually. "Not my problem," I responded, taking a sip of champagne. "He turned green with jealousy watching you talk to that guy." "Again, not my problem," I repeated more firmly. "He made it clear he doesn't want complications, so what I do or who I talk to is none of his business." Victor looked at me for a long moment before sighing. "You two are impossible, you know that? He's in love with you and scared to death, and you're hurt and protecting yourself, and meanwhile you're dancing around each other when you could just talk." "He called me a mistake," I said quietly, all the pain returning at once. "So no, Victor, it's not about talking. It's about him having made a choice, and me having to live with the consequences." What I didn't know was that at that exact moment on the other side of the room, Nina, Nikolai's ex who I'd seen in photos but never in person, was approaching him with a predatory smile and obvious intentions. "Nikolai," she purred, hand touching his arm in a very familiar way. "It's been so long." He looked at her with an expression that would have frozen normal people in place. "Nina, I heard you got married," she continued, undeterred, "but everyone knows it's an arrangement, so I thought maybe we could relive old times." The proposition was clear and completely inappropriate, and it was at that moment that I turned looking for Nikolai and saw the entire scene unfolding. "No," Nikolai said firmly, taking a step back. "I'm married. It's a fake marriage," Nina laughed, approaching again. "Not to me," he said, voice carrying a conviction that made my heart race even from a distance. "It never was fake. Not really. And even if it was, I would never cheat on my wife. So you need to leave Nina, now." I saw the moment Nina realized she had no chance. The way she looked around and saw me watching before leaving with wounded dignity, and then Nikolai's eyes found mine across the crowded room. "Not to me," he'd said. "It never was fake." My heart was beating irregularly in my chest with confusion and hope, and still that residual pain because words were easy. Actions were what mattered, and he'd hurt me in a way that pretty words to an ex didn't erase. I looked away first, turning back to Victor, who was watching everything with a knowing expression. "He likes you," Victor said gently. "It's not enough," I responded, voice breaking slightly. "Liking doesn't erase the fact that he treated me like I was nothing." Nikolai found me later near the exit, clearly having looked for me. "Can we talk?" he asked, and there was something different in his voice, something softer and more vulnerable. "Here?" I looked around at the room still full of people. "In the car, please, just give me 5 minutes." Something in his expression made me agree, and soon we were in the back seat of the car with the driver waiting patiently up front behind the raised partition. "I'm sorry," he started, words coming out in a rush. "For what I said, for the way I treated you. It was cowardly and cruel, and you didn't deserve it." "No," I agreed calmly. "I didn't deserve it. I was scared," he continued, looking at his own hands, "of what you make me feel, of how important you've become. And when I woke up that morning, I realized I could lose you, that you had the power to completely destroy me. And I panicked. So you hurt me first," I completed, understanding but still hurting. "Yes, and it was a terrible mistake, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you if you let me." I looked at him, really looked, seeing sincerity and regret, and something deeper he still couldn't name. "I accept the apology," I finally said, seeing hope light in his eyes before adding, "But accepting an apology doesn't change what you did, doesn't erase how I felt when you called me a mistake, like that night meant nothing when it meant everything to me." "Scarlett, I need time," I cut in gently but firmly. "I need to know if I can trust you again, if you're not going to panic and hurt me every time things get too real, so time, okay?" He nodded, devastated but respectful, and we returned to the penthouse in tense but not hostile silence. And when we separated to different rooms that night, there was a fragile understanding between us. Eventual forgiveness, maybe, but not yet trust, and trust was what really mattered. Chapter 7. The Pursuit. "I'm still here." The change in Nikolai was so visible that even Victor commented one morning when I passed by the office and heard them talking about financial reports. Victor saying something like, "Boss, you're different, lighter maybe," and Nikolai responding with a voice that carried the weight of regret, "I'm trying to be better, the person she deserves." That was on the 4th day after our conversation in the car, and I pretended I didn't hear, but the words kept echoing in my head all day, because change was easy to promise but hard to maintain. So I was watching, waiting to see if it was real or just temporary performance. Except it continued. Small things first, like him stopping trying to trap me in conversations when I clearly needed space, instead just saying, "Good morning," with that small smile and letting me go, respecting my boundaries in a way that showed he was really listening to what I'd asked for. Then came the gestures. I woke up on a Monday and found the specific coffee I loved, but was hard to find waiting in the kitchen. That expensive French blend I'd mentioned once weeks ago in casual conversation, I didn't think he'd paid attention to, but clearly he had, because there it was with a small note in angular masculine handwriting that said only, "Thought of you." My heart did that weird thing of racing and hurting at the same time, because it was a sweet and thoughtful gesture, and exactly the kind of thing that made me want to forgive completely, except I was still scared, still remembered how much it hurt to wake up alone after a night that meant everything. The next day, it was flowers. Not obvious red roses, but pink peonies that were my absolute favorites, and that he had no way of knowing unless he'd asked Lily, which meant he was making real effort to find out things about me, to know me beyond what we showed each other. "You deserve flowers as beautiful as you are," the card said, and I touched the soft petals with trembling fingers before putting the vase in my room where I could see it every morning. Then came books, 3 of them stacked on the coffee table with another note. "You mentioned you wanted to read these. Hope you like them." And when I picked up the first one, I recognized it as that obscure historical romance I'd mentioned wanting to read weeks ago during dinner, a detail so small I barely remembered it myself, but he had stored it away, stored and remembered and acted on. Each gesture wore me down a little more, cracking the walls I'd built around my heart, because it was easy to resist pretty words, but much harder to resist consistent actions that showed he was really trying, really changing. Lily came to visit midweek and found the flowers and books, and looked at me with that knowing expression she always used when she knew she was right about something. "He's pursuing you," she said, picking up one of the books and flipping through it. "And doing his homework. This pursuit is well done, I have to admit." "It's not pursuit," I corrected weakly. "It's just gestures. Consistent and thoughtful gestures completely focused on you specifically," she pointed out. "Scar, he's making an effort, showing he pays attention, that he cares. The question is, are you going to let him in again, or are you going to be scared forever?" I didn't answer because I didn't know the answer yet. I was torn between wanting to believe the change was real and being afraid of getting hurt again if I discovered it wasn't. The moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday night after a particularly long workday. I was in my room reviewing contracts when I heard a hesitant knock on the door, different from the firm, confident knocks Nikolai normally gave. "Come in," I called, saving the document and closing my laptop. He entered, and the first thing I noticed was vulnerability in his posture, shoulders slightly curved and hands in his pockets in a way that seemed more nervous than casual, and when he spoke, his voice came out lower than normal. "Can I talk to you? Won't take long, I promise." I gestured to the space on the bed beside me, but instead of sitting, he stood in front of me for a long moment before doing something completely unexpected. He knelt. Nikolai Volkov, Russian Mafia boss, man who made powerful people tremble, was kneeling in front of me with gray eyes full of raw and unfiltered emotion. "What are you doing?" I asked, voice coming out whispered with shock. "Apologizing to you for real," he said, taking my hands in his. "Not standing where I can pretend I have control, but like this, vulnerable, because you deserve to know that I know I messed up, and that I regret it more than I can express." Tears started forming in my eyes before I could stop them. "Nikolai, I was scared," he continued, words coming out fast as if he'd been holding them for too long, "of what you make me feel, of the way you can completely disarm me with just a look, of realizing that giving you the power to destroy me was terrifying, but inevitable. And when I woke up that morning after the most incredible night of my life, panic took over, and I did the most idiotic thing possible, which was to push you away before you could leave me. You hurt me," I managed to say through tears that were now falling freely. "Made me feel like I was nothing, like that night didn't mean anything when it meant everything to me." "I know," he squeezed my hands, his own eyes shining with unshed emotion. "And I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life. But the difference now is that being afraid of losing you is much worse than being afraid of opening up. So I'm here, on my knees, begging for a chance to do it right, to be the man you deserve even if it takes time, even if I have to prove every day that I've changed." "What if you panic again?" I asked, voice shaking. "What if it gets too hard and you decide it's not worth it?" "It won't happen," he said with absolute conviction, "because I've already tried living without you these last few days, and it was worse than any fear. You're oxygen, Scarlet. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last before I sleep. You transformed this cold penthouse into a home, and transformed me into a better person just by existing. So no, I won't panic again, because now I know that losing you would be losing the only thing that really matters." I pulled him up, because seeing him on his knees was breaking my heart in ways I didn't know were possible, and when he sat on the edge of the bed, I held his face in my hands, wiping away the single tear that had escaped. I want to believe, I whispered. I want so badly to believe this is real. It's real, he swore, turning his face to kiss my palm. More real than anything I've ever felt. I didn't give in completely yet, because healing took time, and trust needed to be rebuilt brick by brick. But I nodded slightly, a small movement that carried the possibility of eventually. Time, I repeated what I'd said before. But keep showing, keep trying, and we'll see. I'll show you every day for the rest of my life if I have to, he promised. And something in the way he said it made me believe that maybe, just maybe, he really had changed. The universe decided to test his resolve exactly 1 week later, when Nikolai woke up with a high fever and body aching, something so rare that Victor commented he hadn't seen the boss sick in literally years. I found him trying to work in his office even though he was clearly suffering, forehead hot to the touch, and eyes glazed in a way that indicated he was much worse than he was admitting. You need to go to bed, I said firmly, closing his laptop despite his weak protests. I have a meeting. Victor can handle it. I cut him off, already helping him up. You can barely stand. Let's go. He didn't argue much, which showed how bad he was feeling, and soon he was lying in his own bed, while I returned with a thermometer and medicine and determination to take care of him, even though technically we were still navigating complicated territory. You don't have to do this, he murmured when I placed a cold cloth on his forehead. I know, I responded simply, but I'm going to anyway. I spent the day taking care of him, making soup he ate reluctantly, constantly bringing water, checking his temperature, and basically refusing to leave even when he insisted he'd be fine alone. When night fell, and the fever finally broke, leaving him exhausted but better, I sat on the edge of the bed watching him, and when I thought he was asleep, I started to get up to go back to my room. Warm fingers wrapped around my wrist gently. Stay, he asked, voice hoarse from sleep and illness, eyes barely open but focused on me with an intensity that made my heart squeeze. Please just stay until I fall asleep. I should have left, should have kept my distance, but something in his vulnerability, in the way he asked instead of ordering, made me give in. Okay, I agreed softly. I'll stay. I lay on top of the covers beside him, and he interlaced his fingers with mine, holding my hand like it was a lifeline, and we stayed like that in the silence of the night until his breathing became deep and regular. I should have left after he fell asleep, but I didn't. I stayed there holding his hand and admitting to myself that despite the fear and pain and caution, I was still completely in love with Nikolai Volkov, and maybe, just maybe, I was ready to try again. The phone rang at 3 a.m, waking me from light sleep, and I recognized Victor's number immediately. We have a problem, he said as soon as I answered, voice tense in a way that made every nerve go on alert. Alexei's back, and this time he's playing for real. We have information that he's planning a direct attack against you and the boss. We need to act now. I looked at Nikolai still sleeping, recovering from illness, and felt steel determination form. What do we need to do? I asked, already getting up silently. And as Victor explained the plan, I knew the storm that was coming would test not just our ability to survive, but our ability to survive together. And this time, I wasn't going to let Alexei win. Chapter 8. Protecting What Matters.
Try me.
The threat came directly and brutally the next day. A text message on my phone from an unknown number with a photo of me leaving the building yesterday, an angle that showed someone had been following and watching me without my knowledge, and the words below the image were simple and terrifying. So pretty. Would be a shame if something happened. I showed Victor first because Nikolai was still recovering, and part of me wanted to protect him even knowing it was ridiculous to protect a mafia boss. But Victor took that choice out of my hands, immediately taking the phone straight to Nikolai's room. 5 minutes later, there were 3 security guards in the living room, Victor coordinating teams on the phone, and Nikolai dressed and furious in a way that made the air around him seem charged with dangerous electricity, and when his eyes met mine through the chaos, there was something wild there I'd never seen before. How long have you been followed? He asked, voice too calm in a way that indicated contained fury. I didn't know I was being followed, I responded honestly. The photo was from yesterday, but it could have been before too. I didn't notice anything. He ran his hand through his hair, clearly fighting to maintain control, and then he was crossing the room to me, hands holding my face with a gentleness that contrasted completely with the tension in his body. You're going to have security with you all the time from now on. It's not negotiable. 24/7, wherever you go, they go with you. Before I would have complained about the loss of freedom, would have fought against the idea of constant babysitters, but now looking at the real concern in his eyes, seeing the barely hidden terror that something could happen to me, I understood it wasn't about control, but about care. Okay, I agreed simply, seeing surprise cross his face at the lack of argument. If that's what needs to be done, then fine. Something softened in his expression, and he pulled me into a tight hug, face buried in my hair, breathing irregular against my neck. I can't lose you, he whispered so low I barely heard it. Not now. Not when I've finally understood how much you mean. I took his face in my hands, forcing him to really look at me, and saw raw vulnerability there that made my heart squeeze painfully. Then don't push me away again, I said softly but firmly. Because I'm here, I'm trying, but you need to let me stay for real, without fear, without panic. Never again, he promised, forehead resting against mine. I promise, Scarlett, never again will I push you away. I'd rather die than live without you again. The absolute sincerity in his words made tears form, but I blinked to hold them back, because this wasn't the time to cry. It was time to be strong as we navigated the storm Alexei was creating. Victor cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the intimate moment he was witnessing. Boss, we have Alexei's location. He's in an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Same area as before, clearly wants a final confrontation. Nikolai moved away from me, but kept his hand on my waist. Constant anchor. How many men does he have? 10, maybe 12 by our calculations. We can gather 20 easily. Do it, Nikolai ordered, already heading toward the office, probably to get weapons and plan strategy, but stopped when my hand grabbed his arm. I'm going with you. It wasn't a request. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Nikolai, I cut in firmly. He threatened me directly. Made this personal, so I'm going. You can let me go with you with protection, or you can watch me go alone. Your choice. I saw the moment he realized I wasn't going to back down, that arguing would be useless, and he sighed in defeat. You stay behind me the whole time, and if something goes wrong, you run. Promise me that. I promise. I lied again, because there was no chance I was running if he was in danger, but he didn't need to know that yet. The warehouse was too quiet when we arrived an hour later, the kind of silence that makes every nerve go on alert, because it means ambush or worse, and Nikolai kept me behind him as we advanced with Victor and 8 armed men flanking us. Alexei was waiting in the center of the open space exactly as we expected, but what we didn't expect was a Scarlett tied to a chair beside him, not Lily this time, but a mannequin my size with a photo of my face pasted on it. A clear and disturbing message. Creative, Nikolai said without emotion. Gun pointed but posture too relaxed in a calculated way. But dolls don't impress me, Alexei. No? Alexei smiled in that way that made my skin crawl. But the real one impresses, I'm sure. He gestured, and suddenly I was surrounded, a man appearing out of nowhere behind me before I could react. Arm around my neck and gun pressed against my temple. Everything happened in seconds. Nikolai spinning with speed that seemed impossible. Gun now pointed at the man holding me but unable to shoot without risk of hitting me, and the expression on his face was more terrifying than anything I'd ever seen. Let her go, he said, each word cutting like glass. Now, Alexei, or I swear I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. But there's the problem. Alexei approached casually, as if he had all the time in the world. You can't hunt me if you choose her, so let me make it simple. Your empire or your wife, choose Nikolai, you drop your weapons, dismiss your men, and let me walk out of here free, or he shoots her. Your decision. I saw Victor tense beside Nikolai, saw the other men waiting for orders, saw Nikolai looking at me with an expression that carried everything we hadn't said yet, every unverbalized feeling, every unmade promise. Don't do this, I managed to say, despite the arm squeezing my throat. Your empire is worth more than... It's not. Nikolai cut me off, voice firm and absolutely certain. And then he was lowering his gun, was signaling the men to do the same, was choosing without any hesitation. Her? I choose her. I'll always choose her. Nikolai, no. I started, but he cut me off with an intense look that stole my breath. You're worth more than any empire, more than any power or money or influence. You're all that matters, Scarlett. The only thing that really matters. Alexei laughed triumphantly, starting to back toward the exit, but made the fatal mistake of relaxing his guard for a second. And in that second, Victor shot with surgical precision, hitting the shoulder of the man holding me, making him let go. Chaos exploded again. Shots exchanged while I ducked and ran for cover. And through the smoke and noise, I saw Nikolai chasing Alexei, who fled like a coward. Saw the moment he could shoot and end it all, but instead let him go. Let him escape to come running back to me. Are you okay? Hurt? Let me see. He was checking me frantically, hands running over my arms and face looking for injuries that didn't exist. I'm fine. I held his face, forcing him to focus. But you let him escape. Your empire. I don't care, he said with absolute conviction. Empires can be rebuilt. Money can be made again. But you're irreplaceable. You're the only thing in this world I can't lose. Tears started falling before I could stop them. All the fear and tension and love transforming into crying while he held me tight. You changed me, he continued, voice thick with emotion. Made me want to be better. Be a person worthy of you. Be a man who deserves to wake up beside you you every day for the rest of my life. You were always worthy, I managed to say between sobs. You just needed to see it. Just needed to believe it was possible to be loved even with all the scars and mistakes. I love you, he said then, words finally coming out after weeks of dancing around them. I love you so much it scares me. You're oxygen and water and sun. You're everything, Princessa. Absolutely everything. I pulled him into a kiss that was salty with tears and sweet with promise, a kiss that sealed everything we were feeling, and when we separated to breathe, I rested my forehead against his smiling through tears. I love you too, I finally confessed. I love you, you stubborn, impossible idiot. I've loved you since that first night even without knowing it yet, and I almost died when you pushed me away, but now I know it's worth every risk because you're worth it. We're worth it, he corrected, kissing my forehead with a tenderness that contrasted with the violence that had happened minutes ago. Victor cleared his throat again. I hate to interrupt a beautiful moment, but maybe we should leave before police show up to investigate the shooting. Nikolai laughed, a genuine and light sound I rarely heard, and helped me up, keeping his arm around my waist as if he couldn't stop touching me now that he had permission. Victor's right, let's go home. Home, he said. Not penthouse or apartment, but home. And as we walked together through the chaos toward the waiting cars, fingers interlaced tight, I knew I'd finally found what I'd always been looking for. It wasn't empire or money or an important family name. It was this. It was him. It was us. It was worth more than any bet I'd ever made. Chapter 9. Rebuilding.
They're lying.
The following weeks were an exercise in learning to love without fear, and I discovered it was simultaneously easier and harder than I'd imagined. Easier because Nikolai was completely present in ways he'd never been before, waking up in his arms, becoming a natural habit instead of a scary exception. And harder because vulnerability, even when reciprocal, was still terrifying in ways I didn't expect. But we were trying. Really trying. And it made a difference. The letter from the Ashford family arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, elegant embossed paper and carefully chosen words that basically asked for reconciliation without ever using the word apology, my father wanting dinner to discuss future family arrangements, as if I were a business deal to be renegotiated. I showed it to Nikolai, who was working in his office, and watched his expression get progressively tenser as he read. "Do you want to go?" he finally asked, returning the letter with controlled care that hid clear anger. "Yes," I responded honestly, "but only if you come with me, and only on my terms. Nothing about letting them dictate how this is going to work." Pride flashed in his eyes, and he pulled my hand to kiss my knuckles. "Then let's establish your terms together, and I'll be by your side the whole time." The dinner happened at the neutral restaurant I chose, instead of the Ashford mansion, because I needed equal ground, not theirs. And when we arrived hand in hand, my father made a face seeing Nikolai, but controlled himself because he needed something from me now. "Scarlett," he began after the painfully polite formalities. "Perhaps we were hasty about the marriage. The family would like to reconsider." "No," I cut in firmly but calmly. "You disinherited me, Dad. Made it very clear I wasn't part of the Ashford family. So don't come now trying to take it back, because you realized you might need me. We made a mistake." "You did," I agreed. "But mistakes come with consequences. So here are my terms. I accept a civil relationship with you, occasional dinners, family events, but I'm never again going to let you dictate my life or make me feel inferior for being a woman or for my choices." Nikolai squeezed my hand under the table, silent support that gave me courage to continue. "Nikolai is my husband for real now. Not an arrangement, but a choice, and if you can't respect that, then we don't need you in our lives." My father processed for a long moment, before nodding slowly, defeat and reluctant respect mixed in his expression. "Understood. Your terms are acceptable." We left there lighter because establishing boundaries was liberating in ways I didn't expect. The change in Nikolai's work came gradually but visibly. He started including me in meetings first, just as an observer, but soon asking for opinions because he discovered that understanding financial risk and business strategy were transferable skills to his world. "What do you think?" he asked during a particularly tense meeting with questionable investors, all the men in the room looking at me with poorly disguised skepticism. I studied the numbers they'd presented and immediately saw the problems, flaws in the logic they were trying to hide with technical jargon and inflated projections. "I think they're trying to scam you," I said calmly. "The numbers don't add up. The promised rate of return is impossible, given the initial investment and proposed timeline. This is a poorly disguised pyramid scheme." Total silence before one of the men laughed nervously. "Mrs. Volkov clearly doesn't understand." "MIT, applied mathematics, financial risk consultant," I cut in politely. "I understand perfectly, and I understand that you're betting my husband wouldn't check the calculations carefully. Your mistake." Nikolai was openly smiling now, pride practically radiating from him. "Meeting's over, gentlemen, and don't come back without an honest proposal. After they left, Victor commented from the corner where he'd watched everything. Boss is really smiling. It's scary to see. But Nikolai didn't care, just pulled me into a proud kiss and whispered, "You're incredible," against my lips. The poker game happened a week later, a private event against business rivals Nikolai had complicated history with, and when I suggested we play together as partners, he accepted immediately. We sat side by side at the table, and it was like magic watching our chemistry translate into perfect play. I read expressions while he calculated probabilities. We communicated with looks and subtle touches, and we annihilated the competition so completely that by the end the other players were laughing in admiration at their defeat. "You two are frighteningly good together," one of them commented. "Clearly know each other well. She's my secret weapon," Nikolai said, hand finding mine under the table. "Always has been." Nina showed up one last time trying to cause trouble at a party we went to, approaching with a venomous smile and clear intention to create drama. "Scarlet, right? We need to talk about Nikolai." "We don't," I cut in kindly but firmly. "He chose and I chose. You need to move on, Nina, because this isn't going to get you anywhere." She blinked, surprised at the direct approach without the drama she clearly expected. "But I wish you happiness," I continued sincerely. "Really, I hope you find someone who makes you happy like Nikolai makes me, but it won't be him. So for your own good, let it go." Nina left without more words, and Nikolai, who had watched everything from afar, came to find me with an admiring expression. "You were kind to her, even though she was trying to cause problems." "I can be kind and still win," I teased. "I learned from you, after all." He laughed and spun me on the dance floor, and in that moment, surrounded by people and music and life, I knew we'd found the perfect balance. Lily and Victor started officially dating at some point during all the chaos. A cute subplot both tried to hide until they couldn't anymore, and when they announced their engagement weeks later, I cried with happiness, because my best friend had found someone as good as she deserved. "Will it be a double wedding?" Lily joked during girls' lunch. "We're already married," I reminded her, laughing. "Technically, yes, but you didn't have a real ceremony." The words stayed in my head, and apparently in Nikolai's too, because that night he found me on the terrace looking at the city and knelt again, this time with a velvet box in his hands. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "For real this time. Proper ceremony with family and friends and vows we write. Declaration to the whole world that you're my choice. My love. My entire life." I pulled him up, laughing through happy tears. "Yes, you idiot. Yes to everything. Forever." And when he kissed me under the New York stars, I knew I'd bet right in that first poker game. I'd bet on us, and won everything that mattered. Chapter 10. All in.
All in.
Final. Alexei made the mistake of coming back 3 weeks before the renewed wedding, apparently unable to accept defeat and determined to have the last word. But this time we were prepared, and more importantly, we were together in ways he could never predict. The proposal came through a formal messenger, public challenge for a poker game with stakes that would make any sane person refuse. Alexei's entire empire against our freedom. Him winning meant us leaving New York forever, and leaving everything behind. "He's bluffing," Victor said, looking at the invitation with skepticism. "No man bets his empire for real. He's desperate," Nikolai corrected, "and desperate men make stupid bets." I looked at him across the table where we were planning our response and saw absolute confidence in the gray eyes that made me melt. "You want me to play?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "I want you to destroy him." Nikolai smiled in that predatory way that still gave me chills for the best reasons. "Show him and the whole world why my wife is the most dangerous person in this city." The game was scheduled to happen at a neutral club with witnesses from both sides and discreet press documenting, because Alexei wanted an audience for the humiliation he was planning. His mistake, not ours. I sat at the table wearing the red dress Nikolai loved, and a calm expression that hid pulsing adrenaline. Alexei across from me, overconfident in a way that told me everything I needed to know about his chances. "Miss Ashford," he taunted, using my maiden name deliberately. "Ready to lose everything?" "Mrs. Volkov," I corrected politely but firmly, "and the only person losing here is you." Nikolai was beside me, not playing, but present, hand touching my shoulder lightly each round, low voice in my ear saying, "You got this," whenever a difficult decision came. I played 6 hands, winning 4, and letting Alexei win 2 to create false confidence. And then on the 7th hand, when the stakes were highest and he was too arrogant, I saw the opening and attacked with surgical precision. Full house again, echoing that first night that changed everything. And when I turned my cards, the silence in the room was absolute before exploding in shocked exclamations. Alexei looked at his own cards, then at mine, then at me, with the expression of a man who just realized he'd lost absolutely everything. "Impossible," he whispered. You cheated." "No," I responded calmly. "I'm just better than you, always have been." The authorities who were waiting outside came in at that moment, because we'd discovered Alexei had outstanding warrants Victor had kindly reported, and watching him being led away in handcuffs was a satisfaction I didn't know I needed. Nikolai picked me up as soon as Alexei left, spinning me in the air with force that took my breath away, laughing against my neck with pure joy. "My wife," he said loud enough for the entire room to hear. "My winner, my everything." And when he kissed me there in front of everyone, I didn't care one bit about the audience because I was his and he was mine, and the whole world could know. The wedding ceremony happened in a beautiful garden on a property outside the city, intimate but elegant with exactly the people who mattered, and when I woke up that morning with Lily helping me put on a real white dress this time, I thought about how far I'd come since that night at the Volkov Club. The Ashford family was there, everyone except my father, who wasn't invited by my choice, establishing boundaries being liberating in ways that still surprised me, and seeing my mother cry as I walked down the aisle made something squeeze in my chest, but not with pain, with peace. Nikolai waited for me at the altar in a gray suit that matched his eyes, and when he saw me, the expression that crossed his face was such pure admiration, it almost made me stumble. The vows were ours, written during nights of wine and laughter and raw honesty. "You defeated me at that table," Nikolai began, voice firm but emotional. "And every day since then, you keep defeating me, making me want to be better, be a man worthy of waking up beside you, and I promise to spend the rest of my entire life proving I deserve you, that this bet we made was the best decision I ever made." Tears were already falling when it was my turn. "You were an unexpected prize," I said through happy crying. "The bet that changed absolutely everything. You saw me when no one saw, respected me when no one respected, and I promised to love you, tease you, and beat you at poker for the rest of my life because that's who we are, partners in everything." He laughed, genuine and free sound, and pulled me into a kiss before the officiant even said, "You may kiss the bride," not caring about protocol, because he'd never cared about rules when it came to us. The applause exploded around us, but I only heard the beat of his heart against mine, only felt the warmth of him enveloping me, and I knew I'd finally found a real home. 6 months later, the casino was a dream we built together, completely legal now with Nikolai gradually leaving the criminal world for something legitimate, and I was official CFO with my own office that I rarely used because I preferred working in his. We were sitting today reviewing contracts, me at his desk with papers spread out and him in the chair watching me with that small smile that meant he was thinking things not at all appropriate for business hours. "Focus," I teased without looking up. "These numbers won't review themselves. I am focusing," he defended. "Just on you instead of the numbers." I looked at him finally and saw love so obvious in his expression that my heart did that racing thing that still happened even after everything. "Want to make another bet?" he asked suddenly, tone changing to something more serious. "Depends on the terms," I responded, cautious but intrigued. He stood up, walked to me, and took my hands, pulling me to my feet. "If you win the next hand of poker we play," he began, vulnerability returning to his voice in a way that still surprised me. "We try for a baby, start a real family." My heart stopped completely before racing. "And if you win?" I asked when I could breathe again. "The same thing," he admitted, smiling in that crooked way I loved. "I just want everything with you, Princessa. Family, future, the rest of our entire lives." Happy tears started falling without permission. "You don't play fair," I accused between laughter and crying. "I learned from the best," he teased back, wiping my tears with gentle thumbs. "All in then," I whispered, pulling him into a kiss. "All in," he agreed against my lips. The cards were forgotten on the table, contracts ignored, the whole world disappearing because we'd already won what really mattered. Each other, forever.
Thank you for staying until the very last page. This story wasn't just about a dangerous bet, power, or a mafia romance. It was about being seen when the world insists on underestimating you, about choosing love over fear, and about daring to go all in when everything is at stake. Scarlett and Nikolai were written to be imperfect, stubborn, and real. Because love isn't clean or easy, it's built in choices, courage, and growth. If any moment made your heart race, hurt, or smile, then they did exactly what they were meant to do. If you felt something reading this, let me know. Your comments, thoughts, and emotions are what give these stories life beyond the page. Thank you for trusting me with your time and with your heart. Until the next story, darling.